From the 1890s, Pullman's vision for his workers was to escape the hardships of American ambition. By some, the people of Pullman were given the American dream, building houses, churches, hotels, factories, a town that would be able to sustain itself with the population. Expressing his ideas of capitalism, Pullman created a town in which a worker does his job because he is treated well. Pullman opposed unions and made up a rule of his utopian society, controlling the town with restrictions and expelling people if they didn't follow this rule, forming an exemplary society. However, problems arose with the Panic of 1893 due to the railroad overbuilding and financing setting banks to collapse. Pullman's way to resolve this was by firing workers and evicting tenants for not being able to pay this rent. This caused many to view him as a dictator limiting their freedoms, taking this case to the Supreme Court. Pullman's town was un-American because it limited lower-class workers' ability to pursue happiness and the American dream, violated human rights with the forcible suppression of the First Amendment, and with excessive aggression towards its tenants and union workers to regulate the outcomes of problems that arose within Pullman's town. Although Pullman was trying to help his workers by creating an exemplary society with the restrictions on alcohol, vice, disease, and crowded slums, creating a town for the workers, Pullman's town was eventually seen by most as unethical and oppressive to the American worker. George Mortimer Pullman was born on March 3, 1831 to a large family with little money. By the 4th grade, he dropped out of school and his family moved to New York, where his dad helped on the Erie Canal construction, moving structures to the expansion. After he died, Pullman took over and was given a contract from New York. By 1857, Pullman moved to Chicago because of the Depression of 1857 through 1859, where he removed buildings in downtown because of the floodplain. In Chicago, he took interest to the rail car, but industrialization kept advancing. He had to seek money elsewhere. He found it in Colorado. There he invested in mining, ore crushing, sawmilling, and building rental, making a fortune up to $20,000 to $100,000. With the money, he returned to Illinois and invested in lavish sleeping cars. He created the Pullman Palace Car Company, trains which were luxurious and unique for its time period. In which President Lincoln died, he was transported in one of the Pullman cars from Washington to his hometown, Springfield. As representation to the extensions of railroad and booming business, it was created. After the Reconstruction era of 1880, Pullman bought 4,000 acres on the south side of Chicago and built his town. The residents paid affordable rent for good quality neighborhood and received 6% return on the cost of housing, building houses, churches, hotels, factories, a town that would be able to sustain itself with the population. Expressing his ideas of capitalism, an economic system in which investment in and the ownerships of the means of production, distribution, and exchange of wealth is made and maintained chiefly by private individuals or corporations. Pullman practiced these ideas that only benefited him and not the average American worker. This era became known as the Gilded Age. At early years, most media praised Pullman and many people viewed Pullman's village as perfectly lovely. In the Columbian Exposition, Chicago's World Fair of 1893, Pullman's planned community was the leading attraction at the fair, and the media praised him throughout the U.S. and described the town as beautiful with humane surroundings. In an overview by Lawrence J. Gutter in The Story of Pullman, he says, "It is unique in the fact that what it represents is in its entire development as well as its origin distinctively and purely American." Clearly, Gutter agrees with the idea that Pullman's town was indeed American and calls Pullman Village distinctively and purely American. This shows the positive response that of most people that visited the Pullman's village had in early years. Some called it rare compared to the slums present with most working communities at the time. This idea of a utopian society marked the change in American society. On another account, a Swedish man who lived and worked in Pullman's village, Ernest Zuckerberg, a young Swedish carpenter, states that he liked the work and the salary wasn't bad, with a 9-hour shift instead of 10 with no decrease in his wage. He also expressed his happiness from the mail from his parents back home, showing that Pullman did care for his workers and knew the struggle as big change as immigrants. Mr. Ernest was fascinated with Pullman's school, where he was learning English and was given the opportunity to progress. This is just one of the few examples of Swedish immigrants who found opportunity in Pullman's village and didn't have nothing negative to say about the village. Rather, they said it brought labor to them and was a good way of taking care of their families. But as history and evidence show, some things are too good to be true, and so is the case with the Pullman village. As time went on, Pullman's supposed perfect town encountered the Panic of 1893, which managing issues arose which violated the workers' rights, leading to the true revealing of the Pullman village. Pullman showed forcible suppression of the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, and the freedom of the press, displayed throughout the Pullman town. An example of this is there was but only one church in all of Pullman village, and there was a scarcely accommodation for religion, even though 1/8 of the population practiced religious exercises on Sunday. Pullman violated the freedom of religion because most of the tenants felt the company wanted to get as much work out of their bodies, not caring for their spiritual welfare. This is important because it defies the Constitution and being American, not being able to express oneself freely and abide by the law, the Constitution. Pullman's town therefore doesn't hold these American values, making it un-American. In the same path, Pullman violates the freedom of press, not allowing any publishing of newspaper or media that wasn't allowed or approved by the Pullman company. Many tenants feared showing resistance that would get them in trouble by the company's spies. This is not only an invasion of privacy, but also transgressed the freedom of press. It is also a way of informing the company. Pullman in response fired and expelled workers out of the town. Not only this, manipulating his perfect town, Pullman sought to keep the image of his perfect village by filtering the press, but instead defied the workers' rights and made his town un-American. The tenants of Pullman's town frequently tried to speak to Pullman about the short wages and high rental costs, but Pullman decided to ignore them. This caused even more hostility and tension between Pullman and his tenants. The workers wanted to have a meeting with Pullman to discuss working conditions, hours, and to get paid overtime, but Pullman stood tall in his decisions and never resolved the problems held by his workers. Pullman never listened to his workers and oppressed their freedom of speech, and this caused many to view him as town as oppressive and him as a dictator. In response, some of his workers joined the American Railroad Union, leading to the Pullman strike on May 11, 1894, having Eugene V. Debs as their leader, but faced pushbacks from the authorities and Supreme Court's decision on the Pullman case. Pullman Town was also seen as un-American due to the fact that the Pullman strike wasn't taken care of morally right. Because America was facing a depression and the Supreme Court had connections with Pullman, the use of excessive aggression was unnecessary and the whole world viewed Pullman's village as un-American, and the court's decision was biased and was taken to protect trade, commerce, and the monopoly of the Pullman Company. For 12 years, the General Managers Association had been in aggressive existence. They were reducing wages and united in extorting high passenger and freight rates. By May 10th, they started firing workers with the excuse that they were lacking of work, and by May 11th, the workers started to strike. By July 3rd, Pullman took control with protection from police and military against anticipated disorder. There is no evidence of laborers creating violence or disorder before the strike, but Pullman wanted to take control of the situation. The call for federal troops was not necessary, but the newspaper Prejudice called out for them because of the strike of 1877. The federal judges issued unprecedented injunctions such as forbidding strikers to quit work. Federal troops were sent supposedly because laborers were obstructing commerce traffic, wrecking engines and trains. But if that were so, then Debs, one of the leaders of the strikes, would have been accused for such actions and sent to jail for a longer period. But he wasn't because there is no evidence. Pullman violated human rights of his laborers with the excessive force and abuse from authorities and military. The press took a big role in this, inculcating disorder of the strike of 1877, as the reasoning enforcement took this to the call force before it got out of hand. Supreme Court, the decision seemed biased and in favor of the Pullman Company for many reasons. Stephen Gregory and Clarence Darrow were the lead attorneys for Debs, but needed help to enhance their chances with the Supreme Court. They chose to reach out to Lyndon Trumbull, but because of his age, he only agreed to write a appellate brief to make an oral argument before the Supreme Court, providing credence and dignity to their cause. Their main points to defend Debs were denied rights as criminal defendants were tried by jury, right to strike undermined, corporates and wealth sacrificed constitutional liberty. On the other hand, Supreme Court Attorney General was Richard Onley, who was a social Darwinist, believing that the social class was done by the survival of the fittest and that the wealthy were chosen by nature. In order for him to remain on top of the chain, he had to defend the nature's chosen ones, but he needed backup as well. His answer was attorney Edwin Walker, who advised him to proceed slowly with efforts to remount the Chicago criminal conspiracy and other parts of the country. Also urged that action against labor activists should proceed slowly so that they didn't get attention from the Supreme Court. Final decision was made Monday, May 27, which was federal government's ability to prevent obstruction of interstate commerce and the transportation of the mails. Justification to end strike and boycott was federal power relating commerce and mail. Federal government could seek injunction and the court had the power to grant it. Blame strikers for acting violent. Pullman had defeated his workers, Debs, the American Railroad, and the labor, but in conclusion, it was the United States courts who ended the strike with the supremacy of law. Pullman showed the world a huge conflict in the U.S., the American worker versus the big capitalist companies. There was conflict with the laborers and the unions, and even though the compromise came down to the Supreme Court, Pullman came out victorious with the company and the village. The laborers' tenants were left puzzled and back to the controlled lives, the same point they started at. A year after Pullman's death in 1898, Illinois Supreme Court saw Pullman Village as illegal and unconstitutional, and forced to sell off the homes fading into Chicago as just another neighborhood. But further actions were made in the years to come. Even though the compromise was made with Pullman didn't benefit the lower class and seemed biased, but in November 16, 1921, a new compromise was made with the Pullman Car Company and clerical and the miscellaneous employees of the operating department specified heroin, in which they achieved one of their biggest goals: more wages, better hours, better working conditions, pay for overtime preparation, coming out victorious. After that, more laborers, not just in Pullman's company but elsewhere, started to gain their labor rights. A fight that started towards the end of the 19th century, reaching a climax with the Pullman strike with the hurtful loss, but as years progressed, they saw light and hope as George Pullman once did with his perfect town.